What would you sacrifice to save a stranger's life? Su Qingxing never imagined her act of desperate compassion would bind her forever to one of the most powerful men in the country as his only cure. In a world where corporate titans wage war through manipulation and deceit, her virginity became a weapon, her body a battlefield. But as Su discovers her true identity and the secrets buried in her past, she realizes she wasn't just saving his life, she was reclaiming her own destiny. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, a like and a subscribe would mean the world to me. It really helps the channel grow and keeps you in the loop for all the latest content. Su Qingxing had always been ordinary. She lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, worked diligently at a modest job, and harbored simple dreams of someday finding happiness and stability. She wasn't remarkable in any particular way, not exceptionally beautiful or talented or wealthy, just another face in the crowd trying to make her way through life with quiet dignity. But on that fateful night, everything changed. The universe conspired to place her in a situation so extraordinary, so impossible, that it would forever alter the course of her existence. The corporate party had been a rare opportunity, a chance to serve as temporary waitstaff and earn some extra money. She hadn't expected to end up in that private suite, discovering the CEO of one of the country's most powerful companies collapsed on the floor, his breathing shallow and labored. Mr. Z, as everyone called him, lay there dying before her eyes, his normally commanding presence reduced to a vulnerable shell. "Help," he had managed to gasp, his eyes reflecting pure terror. Drugged. The emergency call she made connected her to a doctor who delivered the most shocking news imaginable. The symptoms described indicated a rare synthetic compound in Mr. Z's system, one that attacked vital organs within hours, unless counteracted by a specific antidote. But this was no ordinary medicine that could be rushed from a hospital. The doctor's voice had grown grave as he explained the unfathomable reality. The only antidote existed within the human body, specifically through an intimate exchange that would forever change both participants. The compound requires proteins only released during first-time intimate contact, the doctor had explained clinically, though the hesitation in his voice betrayed the unprecedented nature of the situation. The person must be untouched, virgin. There's no other solution, and we have perhaps 30 minutes before permanent damage begins. Su stood frozen, the phone clutched in her trembling hand, as the impossible choice crystallized before her. Let this man die. A stranger, yes, but still a human being with a life, family, dreams. Or sacrifice something deeply personal, something she had been saving for someone special. The psychological weight crashed down upon her shoulders like a physical burden. Her mind raced through every possible alternative. Could someone else be found in time? Was there another medical solution? But as Mr. Z's breathing grew more labored, his skin taking on an alarming pallor, the reality became unavoidable. Time was running out, and she alone stood between this man and death. The internal battle raged within her. Self-preservation screamed at her to leave, to protect herself from this violation of her most intimate boundaries. Why should she sacrifice something so personal for a wealthy CEO who wouldn't even remember her name tomorrow? He represented everything she wasn't: power, wealth, privilege. What did she owe him? But deeper than self-preservation ran something else, a moral compass that couldn't reconcile walking away from someone she could save, not out of adoration for who he was, but out of respect for the simple humanity they shared. The realization came with startling clarity. She couldn't live with herself if she chose to let someone die when she had the power to prevent it. "I'll do it," she whispered, more to herself than to the unconscious man or the doctor still on the line. The words tasted strange on her lips, a mixture of resignation and resolve. The moments that followed remained etched in her memory like fragments of a surreal dream. The doctor's instructions, the careful movements, the clinical detachment she forced upon herself as she approached the CEO. She moved mechanically, trying to separate her mind from what her body was doing. This wasn't about desire or connection. It was medical necessity, an antidote delivered in the most intimate way imaginable. As she lowered herself beside him, tears streamed silently down her face, not from physical pain, but from the emotional weight of what was happening. This moment that should have been special, chosen, meaningful, reduced to an emergency procedure with a stranger. The fear in her eyes mirrored the unconsciousness in his. In that moment of connection, something profound and irreversible happened between them. More than just the physical act, a bond formed, unsought and unexpected. Her body, now literally the vessel of his survival, created a biological link that neither had anticipated nor understood. As the minutes passed, she watched with astonishment as color returned to Mr. Z's face. His breathing steadied, the dangerous rhythm of his heart normalized. The doctor had been right. Her body contained what his needed to survive. The medical miracle unfolded before her eyes, but brought no joy, only a hollow relief tinged with shock. When it was over, she carefully covered him, called for discreet medical assistance as instructed, and retreated to a corner of the room. She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to process what had just happened. The power dynamic between them had fundamentally shifted in ways neither could yet comprehend. She had saved his life through the most intimate sacrifice imaginable, creating a connection that transcended normal human interaction. What would happen when he woke? Would he be grateful, disgusted, indifferent? Would he see her as a savior or an opportunist? The question swirled in her mind as she waited for the medical team to arrive. Watching the steady rise and fall of his chest proved that her sacrifice had worked. The most terrifying aspect wasn't what had already happened, but what might come next. The doctor had mentioned something about ongoing effects, about a potential continued biological dependency. What did that mean for her future? For his? Had she traded one moment of sacrifice for a lifetime of connection to this powerful, unknown man? As security personnel and medical staff swept into the room, Sue became suddenly invisible. They moved around her as if she were merely part of the furniture, focusing entirely on the important man lying on the floor. One of the medical team asked her rapid-fire questions about what had happened, nodding clinically when she explained the treatment administered. If they were shocked, they hid it well behind professional facade. "You'll need to come with us," one of them finally said to her. "The protein exchange may need to continue for full detoxification." In that moment, Sue realized the true magnitude of what had happened. This wasn't over. Her body had become literally the only antidote to his condition, a living medicine that might be required again. The sacrifice wasn't a single moment, but potentially an ongoing obligation. The biological bond created between them would pull her into his world, whether either of them wanted it or not. As they prepared to transport Mr. Z to a private medical facility, Sue caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror across the room. She looked exactly the same as she had hours before, yet everything had changed. Her reflection stared back at her, still ordinary in appearance, still unremarkable to the casual observer, but now irrevocably connected. Her reflection faded from view as medical staff whisked the CEO away, but the question lingered in the air like a haunting echo. What happens when you save someone who could either become your protector or your destroyer? The answer would begin to unfold with the morning light, as Sue discovered that Mr. Z was far more than a nameless executive in distress. He was Ji Jin, the infamous head of Z Group and the center of a conspiracy far more sinister than she could have imagined. Sue woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar softness beneath her. She blinked against sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed a panoramic view of the city skyline. This wasn't her apartment, with its cracked ceiling and temperamental plumbing. The bed beneath her was enormous, the sheets impossibly smooth against her skin. The room itself was bigger than her entire living space, decorated in muted grays and blues that exuded calm affluence. The events of the previous night came rushing back, and Sue sat up with a gasp. Her clothes had been changed. She now wore silk pajamas that whispered against her skin. Who had changed her? Where exactly was she? Miss Xing Xing, Mr. Shi requests your presence for breakfast in 30 minutes. The bathroom is through that door. You'll find everything you need there, and clothes have been provided in the closet. The woman's voice was crisp, professional, without a hint of warmth. Sue found herself in a bathroom larger than most people's living rooms, with marble floors and a shower enclosure that seemed to have more buttons and dials than a spaceship. The closet revealed a selection of clothing that looked suspiciously her size, though nothing resembling her usual practical attire. She chose the simplest option, a pale blue blouse and dark trousers, and followed a stone-faced attendant through corridors that seemed designed to disorient visitors with their identical minimalized luxury. The dining room featured a table that could have seated 20, yet only one place was set at the far end, where a man sat reading documents on a tablet. Sue immediately recognized the sharp jawline and penetrating eyes of the man she had saved. In the harsh morning light, fully conscious and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, Si Hui-jin was even more intimidating than he had been, unconscious and vulnerable. He didn't look up as she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence until she stood uncertainly at the other end of the massive table. When he finally raised his eyes, they were cold and assessing, stripping away layers of her composure with clinical efficiency. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a chair positioned to his right. Not a request, an order. Sue hesitated, then moved toward the indicated seat. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "My private residence, the western compound of Z Group headquarters." His voice was deep, with the faintest hint of an accent that suggested international education. "You are Su Xing Xing, 24 years old. No criminal record, no significant debt, no notable achievements either. Unremarkable education, unremarkable employment history, unremarkable life." He stated these facts without emotion, as if reading a particularly boring report. Sue felt herself flush with a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. "And you are Jia Hui-jin, the man whose life I saved last night." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, at her directness. "Yes, about that. I'm curious what you were doing in that particular room at that particular time." His tone suggested it was more than curiosity. It was suspicion. "I was cleaning," Sue replied simply. "It's my job. I didn't expect to find anyone there, especially not someone in your condition." Shi Qingwei-jin's eyes narrowed slightly. "Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Arriving just when I was incapacitated by a substance few people know exists." Before Sue could respond, the doors opened and 3 people entered. A woman in a laboratory coat carrying medical equipment, a man in an expensive suit who radiated corporate authority, and another man whose deliberately nondescript appearance and watchful eyes marked him as security. "Mr. Shi, we have the preliminary results," the woman in the lab coat said, glancing uncomfortably at Sue. "She stays," Chi Hui-jin said firmly. "This concerns her directly," the woman nodded tersely. "As we suspected, the compound appears to be a modified version of RX-290, developed for military applications. It's designed to target specific neural pathways, unless counteracted by certain proteins found in," she hesitated, glancing at Sue again. "Reproductive fluids," Shi Qiangyan finished bluntly. "Continue." "Yes, but this variant has an unusual characteristic. It creates a biological dependency on the initial protein source. Your body has begun producing antibodies specific to Ms. Xing Xing's biological markers. Separation could trigger a severe autoimmune response." The corporate-looking man stepped forward with barely concealed disdain. "Sir, this is obviously a setup. This woman, and whoever she's working with, engineered this situation. The timing of the attack, her convenient presence, the specific nature of the compound, it can't be coincidence." Sue felt blood drain from her face as all eyes turned to her. "That's absurd. I don't even know what you're talking about. I was just doing my job." The security man moved closer, his hand resting ominously on what Sue suspected was a concealed weapon. We've begun investigating her connections. No direct links to competitors yet, but anyone can be bought. I wasn't bought, Sue protested, rising from her chair. I found him collapsed on the floor. I called for help. She stopped, realizing how futile her protestation sounded. Against their certainty, Si Chengqiang raised a hand, silencing everyone. If she was working with my enemies, why save me at all? They had me precisely where they wanted me. The corporate man frowned. Perhaps the goal wasn't your death, but your incapacitation, creating a dependency that could be exploited. A heavy silence fell over the room as Qi Huaijin studied Sue, his expression unreadable. She met his gaze steadily, despite the fear coursing through her veins. In that moment, she realized she had unknowingly stepped into a world where power struggles played out with lives as collateral damage. "Leave us," Si Chiajian finally said. The others hesitated, but complied, filing out with reluctant looks backward. When they were alone, he leaned forward slightly. "Here is what I know for certain. Someone in my inner circle betrayed me. The Chewy Group's proprietary information was sold to us last month. Information they should never have been able to access. Someone is playing a longer game, and you, Ms. Xingxing, have become an unexpected variable." "I'm not part of any game," Sue insisted. "I'm just a cleaner who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." Xian Qiujin's laugh was short, almost bitter. "There are no coincidences at this level, Miss Xingqian. Only carefully orchestrated moves and counter-moves." He stood abruptly, towering over her. "Whether you are a pawn or a player remains to be seen. But for now, it seems our fates are biochemically intertwined." He pressed a button on the table, and the door opened immediately. "Arrange accommodations for Miss Xingxing. She will be staying indefinitely. Full security protocols. No unauthorized communication. She goes nowhere without escort." "Wait," Sue protested. "You can't just keep me here. I have a life, a job." "Head," Si Qianqiaijin corrected coldly. "Your former employer has been compensated for your indefinite absence. As for your life," he paused, studying her with those penetride suspended, temporarily suspended, "until I determine exactly what role you play in this scenario. You will remain where I can see you." 3 days into her gilded cage existence, Sue found herself facing an unexpected proposition. A sleek-suited man named Mr. Wei entered her room with practiced confidence, setting down an elegant leather briefcase on the coffee table between them. His smile never reached his eyes as he introduced himself as Z Group's head of risk management. But Sue immediately understood his true function. He was a problem solver, and in this equation, she was the problem. "Miss Xingxing," he began, voice smooth as polished marble. "I understand you've had quite an unusual introduction to our organization." He opened his briefcase with manicured hands, removing a stack of documents and sliding them across the table. "We appreciate your assistance with Mr. Xi's medical situation, but we believe it's time to formalize our arrangement." Sue glanced at the papers, immediately recognizing the legal jargon of a non-disclosure agreement. The terms were comprehensive. She would promise never to speak about what had happened with Qi Huaijian, never contact him again, never mention Z Group in any context. But what caught her attention was the figure on the final page. A settlement amount with more zeros than she had ever seen in her bank account. "This compensation reflects our gratitude," Mr. Wei explained, watching her reaction carefully. "We believe it's more than fair, given your temporary inconvenience. Most people in your position would consider this exceptionally generous." Sue's fingers traced the edge of the document, her mind racing. The sum represented financial freedom, enough to clear her family's debts, enough to return to school, enough to start a new life far from here. For someone who had grown up counting every yuan, the figure was almost incomprehensible. "You should understand what a rare opportunity this is," Mr. Wei continued, leaning forward. "Mr. Xi has many admirers who would have willingly helped him without expecting anything in return. The fact that you happened to be in that particular room at that particular time was simple chance. This offer acknowledges that coincidence with remarkable generosity. She recognized the manipulation tactic immediately. He was simultaneously diminishing her importance while suggesting she should feel grateful. The implication was clear. She was nothing special, just conveniently available when needed, and now should be delighted to disappear with her unexpected windfall. Unbidden memories flooded Sue's mind. Her childhood home, with its leaking roof, her mother working double shifts at the factory, the scholarships that were always just beyond her reach, the loans she'd taken out to help her family when her father fell ill. Money had always been the insurmountable barrier between her life as it was and her life as it could be. "This is a limited-time offer," Mr. Wei added, his voice hardening slightly. "Mr. C values discretion above all else. Should the situation become complicated, the offer would necessarily be withdrawn." Sue looked up sharply. The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable. "Sign now, or face consequences." "What exactly am I agreeing not to disclose?" she asked quietly. "The fact that your CEO was drugged with a military-grade compound that somehow made its way into his private quarters, or the fact that someone was clearly trying to kill him?" Mr. Wei's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his pen. "You're overthinking this, Miss Xingxing. We're simply ensuring privacy around a sensitive medical situation, nothing more." "If it's just about privacy, why offer so much money?" Sue pressed, her suspicion growing. "This amount suggests something far more significant than simple discretion." Without missing a beat, Mr. Wei doubled the offer, writing the new figure on the document's margin. "Perhaps this better reflects the importance of your silence and immediate departure from Mr. Xi's life." Sue stared at the new number, momentarily stunned. The desperation behind such an increase was revealing. They weren't just paying for her silence. They were paying to separate her from Si Kuai-yin completely. But why? The medical reports had indicated a potential ongoing biological dependency. Were they risking his health to remove her from the equation? And if so, why was that so important to them? "Take some time to consider," Monsieur Le suggested, misinterpreting her silence for hesitation. "But not too much time. By tomorrow morning, we'll need your decision." He placed an elegant pen beside the documents. "Most people in your position would be celebrating right now. This is life-changing money." Sue picked up the pen, feeling its weight in her hand. It probably cost more than she earned in a month. The man across from her watched expectantly, already anticipating her signature, already planning her removal from Chiekuei-jin's world. She said finally, placing the pen down with deliberate care. Mr. Wei blinked, genuine surprise crossing his face for the first time. "I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly," Sue interrupted. "You want me gone, but I won't be bought." "Everyone has a price, Miss Xingxing," he countered, his tone now openly condescending. "Perhaps yours is simply higher than I've offered." "Perhaps some things aren't for sale," she replied, pushing the documents back toward him. "My silence on what happened isn't something you need to purchase. My dignity, however, isn't available at any price." For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then, a new voice spoke from the doorway. "An interesting distinction," Si Tianqian said, stepping into the room. His dark gaze moved from the rejected contract to Sue's face with calculated intensity. "Mr. Wei, you're dismissed." The suited man gathered his papers with military precision, his expression unreadable as he exited the room. Sue remained seated, her heart pounding, but her resolve unwavering, as Shi Li Jin took the vacated seat across from her. "You turned down enough money to change your life," he observed, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "Why?" "Because changing my life isn't worth losing myself," Sue answered simply. "And signing that paper, taking that money to disappear quietly, that's not who I am." Something shifted in Si Huijin's expression, a subtle change that most would miss, but Sue caught it, a flicker of reassessment, perhaps even respect. crossed his features before the controlled mask returned. Most people in your position would have taken the money, he noted. Most people in your position wouldn't care why I refused it, she countered. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. True enough, he leaned back, regarding her with new consideration. You've surprised me, Su Xingxing. That doesn't happen often. Si Huijin's rare admission of surprise marked a turning point, but it was merely the prelude to a revelation that would shatter Su's understanding of her own life. As she navigated the sprawling mansion over the following days, a strange feeling of déjà vu occasionally washed over her. The sensation wasn't recognition exactly, but rather an unsettling familiarity that made no logical sense. The staff maintained their cool professionalism, answering basic questions, but offering nothing beyond their prescribed duties. Su found herself drawn to the mansion's east wing, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked meticulously manicured gardens. It was there, on her 5th day, that she discovered the study, a room lined with mahogany bookcases and dominated by an imposing desk that somehow seemed to hold the weight of corporate empire. She hadn't meant to snoop, not really. The folder had been left carelessly on the desk's edge, bearing the Z Group logo and a simple label that caught her eye. Su marriage contract. Her hands trembled as she opened it, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. The document inside bore official government seals, elegant calligraphy, and 2 names that seemed to leap from the page: Xie Qingyan and Su Xingxing. This is impossible, she whispered, her voice sounding foreign in the silent room. The date on the marriage certificate was 3 years earlier, a time when she'd been struggling through her final year of university, completely unaware that her name and future had been signed away without her knowledge or consent. Su sank into the leather chair behind the desk, the certificate gripped tightly between her fingers. Her mind raced through possibilities: identity theft, a bizarre coincidence, some elaborate scheme. But the signature that supposedly belonged to her father was unmistakable, with its distinctive flourish she'd seen countless times on school permission slips and rental agreements. I see you've been making yourself at home. Qi Changqiang stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he leaned against the frame. Su held up the document, too shocked for pretense or apology. What is this? She demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Why is my name on a marriage certificate with yours from 3 years ago? He crossed the room with unhurried steps, took the document from her hands, and glanced at it with the casual indifference of someone checking yesterday's weather report. Ah, that should have been filed away properly. Filed away? That's your response? Su stood, anger replacing her initial shock. This says we've been married for 3 years. 3 years I knew nothing about. Qi Huijin placed the document on the desk and regarded her with clinical detachment. It was a business arrangement between your family and mine. Nothing more. My family would never. Your father signed the agreement when Z Group acquired struggling Su Manufacturing, he interrupted. The marriage was part of the terms, insurance if you will. I never intended to activate it. The word activate hung in the air between them, cold and transactional. Su felt physically ill as pieces began falling into place. Her father's sudden recovery from debt, the family's improved circumstances, her mother's cryptic comments about securing her future. You're saying my family sold me to you. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. Sold. Leveraged. His precision with language only heightened her sense of betrayal. The arrangement gave your family security and positioned them favorably with Z Group partners. It was meant to be annulled this year, once certain business milestones were achieved. Su paced the room, struggling to contain the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. And I was never supposed to know? Never supposed to have a say in my own life? Correct. His honesty, while brutal, carried no malice. The arrangement served its purpose. I had planned to dissolve it discreetly, with generous compensation to your family. Su stopped pacing, a horrifying possibility crystallizing in her mind. The hotel room, the drugging, Was that all orchestrated too? Was I manipulated into being there that night? Something flickered across Ji Huijin's face. The briefest shadow of surprise, quickly mastered. No, that incident was unexpected. An attack on me, not a scheme to involve you. Should I believe anything you say? Sue challenged, moving toward him. You've been married to me for 3 years without my knowledge. Who does that? Those who understand that business and personal matters should remain separate, he replied coolly. The contract was never meant to involve you directly. It was simply a formal agreement between families. Between families? Sue repeated, the words hollow. And what about Miss Sue, your assistant? Were you carrying on with her while legally married to me? The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something approaching amusement. My personal relationships are none of your concern. The marriage exists on paper only, nothing more. Sue's mind raced through every interaction with her family over the past 3 years. Birthdays, holidays, career advice. Had every moment been shadowed by this secret? Had they looked at her differently, knowing she was legally bound to a man she'd never met? You can't possibly expect me to just accept this, she said finally. I expect nothing from you, he replied. As I said, the arrangement was meant to be dissolved. Recent circumstances have merely complicated the timeline. Sue walked to the window, staring out at the gardens below as she collected her thoughts. The anger remained, but something else was forming alongside it, a determination that surprised even her. I won't sign any annulment, she said firmly, turning to face him. Not now. His expression hardened. That's not your decision to make. Actually, it is. Sue picked up the marriage certificate again. This makes me legally your wife. You and my family made sure of that. And now, I'm going to use that position. For what purpose? His voice remained level, but his stance had changed, becoming more alert. To understand what really happened. Why I was in that hotel room. Why you were drugged. And what my family has been hiding from me. Sue met his gaze without flinching. I didn't choose to be your wife, Zhe Qiangyang Q, but since I am, I'll use that title to protect myself and discover the truth. For several long moments, he studied her with an intensity that would have intimidated her days earlier. Now, she held her ground, the betrayal hardening into resolve. Very well, he said finally. If that's your position, I'll have suitable quarters prepared for Mrs. C. The staff will be informed of your status. The formal acknowledgement should have felt like a victory, but Sue recognized it for what it was, a strategic concession from a man who never made moves without calculating several steps ahead. I don't want your name or your money, she clarified. I want answers, and I want to know who I've truly been all this time. He nodded once. A barely perceptible movement. We all want answers, Mrs. Shi. The question is whether we're prepared for them when they arrive. As he turned to leave, Sue called after him. When did you first learn about me? About the arrangement? He paused at the doorway. I've known of the contract since its inception, but I've never known you, Su Xingxing. Not until now. I've known of the contract since its inception, but I've never known you, Su Xingxing, not until now. His words lingered in the air between them as he left, but what neither of them realized was that someone else had been listening, someone who had spent years ensuring their paths would never cross, and whose carefully laid plans were now unraveling with each passing hour. Sue stood motionless in the empty room, feeling the weight of Shi Huijin's unexpected admission. The marriage contract had been merely words on paper before. Now it felt like a tether, binding her to a world she barely understood. With a deep breath, she made a decision. If she was going to survive in this gilded cage, she needed to understand who had tried to harm the CEO she was now legally bound to. Next morning, Sue began her investigation in the only way she could, by observing. She positioned herself in the common areas of Shi Huijin's residence, watching the staff and executives who orbited around him. Each interaction revealed power dynamics, whispered conversations that halted when she approached. and sideways glances that conveyed more than words. Sue might lack formal education in corporate politics, but she recognized the universal language of secret. During a quiet moment in Si Huijin's home office, a space she'd been granted limited access to as his legal wife, Sue discovered an encrypted folder on a tablet, left momentarily unattended. The password prompt stared back at her, but she remembered the 6-digit code she'd seen Si Huijin enter earlier. Her conscience warred with her survival instinct as her fingers hovered over the screen. With a quick glance toward the door, she entered the code. What she found sent ice through her veins. Financial records showed irregular payments from Sue Manufacturing, her family's company, to offshore accounts linked to Z Group's primary competitors. The transactions bore her father's digital signature, but attached notes were signed simply Mr. Sue. A sickening realization washed over her. Her own family had been selling company secrets even after the acquisition and marriage arrangement. Finding anything interesting? The voice from the doorway made her jump. Miss Sue, Si Huijin's personal assistant, stood watching with a calculated smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I was just," Sue began, but the explanation died on her lips. Something in Miss Sue's expression told her not to reveal what she'd discovered. "Mr. Shi doesn't appreciate people going through his personal files," Miss Sue said, stepping into the room with practiced grace. Even his wife. The way she emphasized the last word carried unmistakable disdain. Sue met the assistant's gaze steadily. "I'm trying to understand what happened the night he was drugged. Someone tried to kill him, and now I'm caught in the middle of it." Miss Sue's perfect composure slipped for just a fraction of a second, enough for Sue to notice. "Some matters are best left to those who understand them," she replied, her voice honey-sweet but eyes cold as winter. "Focus on your recovery together. The company has handled worse crises." After Miss Sue left, C continued her search with renewed urgency. She found communications between Miss Sue and unknown contacts, discussing contingency plans should the primary approach fail. One message mentioned a promised executive position at Z Group once the transition was complete. The implication was clear. Huijin's assistant was actively working against him, lured by the promise of power once he was removed. That night, Sue found a handwritten note slipped under her door. The elegant penmanship couldn't disguise the threatening undertone. "You've stepped into waters too deep for someone who doesn't know how to swim. Return to the shallows while you still can." Unsigned, but the message was unmistakable. Someone knew she was investigating, and they were watching her. Sue's hands trembled as she burned the note in her bathroom sink, watching the paper curl and blacken. She was in danger, yet possessed neither the connections nor the authority to protect herself. Her legal status as Si Huijin's wife offered limited shelter, but she was beginning to understand that it also made her a target. The next day, while reviewing public financial records of Z Group's competitors, Sue stumbled upon repeated mentions of the Chewy Group, a rival corporation that had once been aligned with Z Group before a mysterious falling out years ago. What caught her attention wasn't the corporate rivalry, but a photograph in an old business journal showing a younger Si Huijin standing alongside the Chewy Group's founder. Their body language suggested not just business associates, but friends. Even more surprising was a small notation in a lawsuit filing between the companies that referenced a personal relationship terminated under disputed circumstances. This wasn't merely business. There was history here, something personal that ran deeper than corporate competition. As Sue dug further, connections began to emerge like constellations. The same dates that showed irregular payments from her family's company to Z Group competitors aligned with major business decisions that had negatively impacted the Chewy Group. It seemed her family had been selling information specifically chosen to harm this particular rival. But why? A week into her investigation, Sue narrowly avoided an accident when the brakes on a company car signed to her mysteriously failed. The security footage from the garage had been conveniently erased for maintenance purposes. The message was clear. Someone was escalating from threats to action. That evening, Sue made her way to Si Huijin's private study, security badge in hand. She found him reviewing documents, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a desk lamp. He looked up, surprise briefly crossing his features before his mask of indifference returned. "I need to speak with you," Sue said without preamble. "My life is in danger, and so is yours." For a moment, she thought he might dismiss her. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Proceed." Sue laid out everything she'd discovered. The payments from her family's company, Miss Sue's betrayal, the connections to the Chewy group, and the escalating threats against her. She watched his expression shift from skepticism to cold anger as she presented her evidence. "My father sold company secrets," she admitted, her voice steady despite the shame she felt. "And your assistant is working with whoever tried to poison you, promised a position once you're gone." Shi Huijin remained silent for a long moment after she finished. "Why bring this to me?" he finally asked. "You could use this information to negotiate a better position for yourself." Sue met his gaze directly. "Because, despite what you think of me, I didn't ask for any of this. But now that I'm here, I won't be a pawn in someone else's game. Neither of us deserves to be manipulated." Something shifted in his eyes, a reassessment that felt more significant than words. "You've put yourself at considerable risk gathering this information." "I'm already at risk just by being here," she countered. "At least this way, I'm choosing my path." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then it seems we have common enemies, Mrs. Shi." He reached for his phone. "It's time we compare notes. Trust is a luxury that shatters in an instant." Less than 12 hours after Si Huijin agreed to compare notes with Sue, she stood frozen in the doorway of her guest suite, facing 4 expressionless security guards. Their presence transformed an ordinary morning into something darker, more sinister. The lead guard, a tall man with military posture, extended a tablet toward her. "Mrs. Z, you are required to vacate the premises immediately. Your access to all Z Group systems and facilities has been terminated." Sue's bewilderment turned to horror as she glimpsed the document on the screen. An internal security brief with her name and photograph prominently featured, alongside words that made her blood run cold. "Corporate espionage, theft of proprietary information, and conspiracy with competitors." "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice barely steady. "I haven't done anything wrong." The guard's expression remained impassive. "Your personal effects will be searched before you leave. Please come with us now." As they escorted her through the mansion's corridors, Sue caught glimpses of staff averting their eyes. Just yesterday, they had nodded respectfully at Si Huijin's acknowledged wife. Today, she was a criminal being marched out in disgrace. The transformation was as swift as it was complete. In the main foyer, Si Huijin stood waiting, his face a mask of controlled anger. Behind him was Zhang Yi, his trusted advisor, whose sympathetic expression seemed at odds with the gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. "Could you?" Si Huijin's voice cut through the silence. "I offered you protection, acknowledged you as my wife, and this is how you repay my trust?" Sue stared in disbelief as Zhang Yi handed Huijin a file folder. "We found this necklace hidden among her things," he said, producing an elegant diamond pendant. "It matches the description of the access key used to enter the secure server room last night." Xi Qianzion's eyes narrowed as he examined the necklace. "And the bid price?" "Leaked to Kangxing Group 40 minutes after she accessed the files," Zhang Yi confirmed. "Their counteroffer arrived this morning, undercutting us by precisely 2%. Sue's mind raced. She had never seen the necklace before, had no knowledge of any bit prices or server rooms. The evidence was fabricated, yet so meticulously crafted that even she momentarily questioned her own actions. This was a simple frame-up. It was a sophisticated operation, executed by someone who understood not just Z Group systems, but how to manipulate digital evidence to create an unassailable narrative. "I've never seen that necklace," she protested. "Check the security footage. I never went near any server room. Zhang Yi smiled apologetically. We did check, Mrs. Shi. The footage clearly shows you entering at 11:42 p.m. using this access key. He held up a tablet, displaying grainy security footage of someone who looked remarkably like Su entering a restricted area. Xie Kuai-jin's expression hardened further. The electronic trail leads directly back to your devices. Files were copied to your laptop and transmitted to an external server. Su felt a chill of realization. Whoever had orchestrated this had access not only to Z Group's most secure systems, but also to her personal devices. The level of planning suggested intimate knowledge of both her and Z Group's operations, knowledge that few people possessed. "Z Huaijin," she said, using his full name deliberately. "Look at me. You know this isn't true. Someone is setting me up." For a fraction of a second, uncertainty flickered in his eyes before they turned cold again. "Remove her from the premises," he ordered. "Lidl will contact you regarding the consequences of your actions, messieurs." The dismissal was absolute. As security escorted her out, Su caught Zhang Yi's subtle smile of triumph. In that moment, she understood. He wasn't just delivering evidence. He was orchestrating her downfall. Outside the gates, Su found herself suddenly alone. No phone, no access to funds, and with the weight of accusations that could lead to criminal charges. She had been systematically cut off from any resources or allies who might help her clear her name. The realization was terrifying, but it sparked something within her, a determination that grew stronger than her fear. Over the next 3 days, Su operated from the margins of society. She pawned her wedding ring for enough cash to rent a small room in a rundown hostel and purchase a prepaid phone. Using public computers at libraries, she began tracing the digital footprints of the evidence against her, searching for inconsistencies that might reveal the truth. On the 4th day, Su's persistence yielded results. In a news article about Z Group's recent security upgrades, she spotted a detail that didn't align with the evidence presented against her. The server room she supposedly accessed had been decommissioned 2 months earlier as part of a system-wide upgrade. The security footage couldn't possibly be recent. It was from before the renovation. This discovery energized her investigation. Working methodically, she cross-referenced public records of Z Group's activities with the timeline of her alleged espionage. The inconsistencies began to multiply. The bid information she supposedly leaked hadn't even been finalized when she was accused of stealing it. The electronic trail supposedly leading to her devices contained timestamps that didn't match the server logs accessible through Z Group's public investor portal. But her most significant breakthrough came when she recognized the distinctive pattern on the access key necklace. It wasn't just any jewelry. It was a limited edition piece created for Zhang Yi's wife's jewelry line, manufactured exclusively for select Z Group executive spouses. Only someone with intimate knowledge of both Z Group's inner workings and Su's personal life could have crafted such convincing evidence. Su needed proof, tangible enough, to reach Xiqianjian, something that couldn't be dismissed or deleted. Her opportunity came when she noticed a familiar face at a cafe near Z Group headquarters. Li Min, a junior security analyst she had briefly met during her stay at the mansion. The young woman looked troubled, constantly checking her surroundings with nervous glances. Taking a chance, Su approached her. "The timestamps don't match, do they?" she said quietly, sliding into the seat across from Li Min. "You've noticed it too?" Li Min's eyes widened with recognition and fear. "I can't talk to you," she whispered, gathering her belongings. "Wait," Su pleaded. "I don't need you to say anything. Just watch this." She placed a napkin on the table and sketched out the timeline inconsistencies she'd discovered. "Someone manipulated the security logs. You know who has that level of access." Li Min stared at the napkin, her professional training clearly battling with her sense of justice. Finally, she slid a flash drive across the table. "I didn't give you this," she said, standing quickly. "But the video shows you hired a hitman, and the toxicology report shows over a dozen poisons in his body. I can't be part of this." She walked away without looking back. A flash drive contained irrefutable evidence. Original security footage showing Jiang Yi accessing the server room, using the necklace later found among Su's belongings. Emails between Jiang Yi and Kang Xing group executives dating back months. And most damning of all, a video of Jiang Yi doctoring the evidence used against Su. Su needed to get this information to Xiqian Ujian, but direct access was impossible. She took a calculated risk, sending a copy of the evidence to both Xiqian private email and to his grandfather, the family patriarch whose influence remained undiminished despite his semi-retirement. The response came within hours. A sleek black car with tinted windows arrived at her hostel, driven by Shi Huaijin himself. The silent patriarch who had watched empires rise and fall made even the most powerful men tremble. As the ancestral Xi family estate loomed before her, Su couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something far larger than corporate espionage. The response to her evidence against Jiang Yi had come swiftly. A sleek black car with tinted windows arrived at her hostel, driven by Ji Huaijin himself. Shadows stretched long across dynasties, their reach extending far beyond what the eye can perceive. The car wound through iron gates that opened silently before them, revealing manicured gardens where ancient trees stood sentinel over a mansion that seemed to exist in another century. Jin remained silent during their journey, his knuckles white against the steering wheel, tension radiating from him in almost visible wave. When they finally stopped, he turned to her with an expression. "My grandfather rarely speaks with outsiders," he said, his voice unusually soft. "He's been the shadow emperor of Xi Enterprises for over 50 years. Whatever he tells you," he paused, seeming to struggle with his words, "just remember that in his world, people are merely pieces on a chessboard." The mansion's interior felt like stepping through time. Antique vases worth more than Su's entire childhood home, lined hallways, adorned with scrolls bearing calligraphy from masters long dead. An elderly servant led her through a labyrinth of corridors, finally stopping before carved double doors that opened without a sound. The room beyond was surprisingly modest compared to the mansion's opulence. Natural light filtered through paper screens, illuminating a simple tea setting. Behind it sat an elderly man, so still he might have been a statue. Despite his obvious age, his eyes were startlingly clear, studying her with an intensity that made Su feel transparent. "Su Xing," he said, his voice stronger than his frail appearance suggested. "For 24 years I have waited for this meeting. Please." Su lowered herself onto the cushion opposite him, feeling as though she were being measured against some invisible standard. The patriarch poured tea with practiced movements, his hands steady despite their age-worn appearance. "Do you believe you were wronged when you discovered your marriage to my grandson?" he stated, rather than asked. "The truth is far more complex. I arranged that marriage, not your father. Not for business reasons, as you were told, but because it was always meant to be." Su's breath caught. "I don't understand." "Of course you don't. You were raised to believe a story crafted to protect you." The old man sipped his tea, his gaze never leaving her face. "Tell me, have you never questioned why you bear no resemblance to either of your parents? Why your intelligence and natural business acumen seem to spring from nowhere in a family of laborers?" Cold realization washed through Su like winter rain. "What are you saying? You are not a Su by birth," he said simply. "You were switched with another infant days after your birth. An arrangement I orchestrated to protect you from those who would have eliminated any trace of your bloodline." The world tilted beneath Su. Every memory, every struggle of her childhood, suddenly reframed as someone else's life she had been living. Her hands trembled against the teacup. Family dynasties and major corporations employ intricate succession plans to safeguard their legacy. the patriarch continued, his tone almost professorial. Sometimes those plans involve difficult choices, separating a child from their birthright temporarily, to ensure they survive long enough to claim it. Who am I? The question emerged as barely a whisper. The granddaughter of my oldest friend and greatest rival, he answered, and the rightful heir to what he built. Sue's mind raced through fragments of research she'd gathered about Zoo Group's competitors. The Chewy Group, she breathed, pieces clicking into terrible alignment. The patriarch nodded once. 24 years ago, when tensions between our corporations were at their peak, there was an attempt on your grandfather's life. He survived, but your parents did not. With enemies closing in, we made a decision. You would be raised away from danger, your identity concealed until the time was right. Anger flashed through Sue's confusion. You stole my life, she accused. Everything I thought I knew about myself is a lie. I gave you life, he corrected firmly. Had you remained with your family, you would have been eliminated before your first birthday. The Sue family were loyal employees who agreed to raise you as their own, to give you a normal childhood far from the dangers of corporate warfare. The implications crashed over Sue in waves. Identity theft on the grandest scale, not just papers and credit cards, but her entire sense of self. Research she'd read about identity crises flashed through her mind, questioning long-held beliefs, relationships, personal narratives leading to shock and displacement. This was happening to her in real time, her mind struggling to integrate information that changed everything. The marriage certificate, Sue realized suddenly. It wasn't just a business arrangement. It was your way of ensuring I'd eventually return to this world. The old man's lips curved in the barest suggestion of a smile. Insurance, an unbreakable legal bond that would someday bring you back where you belong, though I had not planned for it to be activated quite so dramatically. Sue's eyes narrowed. The drugging incident. You had something to do with that? Desperation forces extreme measures, he acknowledged without apology. My sources indicated that certain parties were close to discovering your true identity. The time for careful planning was over. You needed to be brought under she protection immediately. So you poisoned your own grandson? Her voice rose incredulously. I ensured he would survive, with your help, the patriarch corrected, creating circumstances where your paths would cross irrevocably. The compound was carefully chosen, dangerous enough to necessitate intervention, but controllable, with the right antidote. The calculated manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. A chess master who had orchestrated decades of moves, sacrificing pawns, positioning pieces, all toward some endgame she couldn't yet see. Tell me this now, Sue demanded, because the final move approaches. His voice dropped, conspiratorously. Your marriage to my grandson was never merely about your protection. It was about healing the rift between our corporations, reuniting what should never have been divided. Understanding dawned with terrible clarity. You want me to claim my inheritance as the Chewy heir, then use my marriage to Jin, to merge the companies. Two empires united through one marriage, the patriarch confirmed. A solution generations in the making. The revelation struck Sue with physical force. She wasn't just a pawn in their game. She was the centerpiece of the entire strategy. The weight of legacies, corporate empires, and generational planning crashed onto her shoulders. Does Shihai Jin know any of this? She asked, already suspecting the answer. My grandson knows only what he needed to know at each stage, the patriarch replied. Now it is time for him to learn the rest, but I wanted you to hear it first. Your rightful claim to power does not come through him. His claim is strengthened through you. The weight of the patriarch's revelations followed Sue like a shadow as she returned to find Jian collapsed in the hallway, his breathing labored and skin burning with fever. How strange that the man who appeared invincible in boardrooms now depended entirely on her presence to survive. A dependency neither of them had chosen, yet one that would force them to see beyond the lies that had shaped their lives. Sue knelt beside him, her hand instinctively reaching for his forehead. The heat radiating from his skin confirmed what the medical team had warned might happen. Separation from her for too long had triggered another episode. As security personnel flashed toward them, Sue watched something unfamiliar flash across Xie Huaijin's face. Before he lost consciousness, "He needs to be moved to his quarters immediately," she instructed, surprising herself with the authority in her voice. "And I need to stay with him." Hours later, as Sue sat beside Ji Qianjian, she observed the man who had built an empire, now reduced to something entirely human. His fever dreams manifested as mumbled words, fragments of board meetings intermingled with childhood memories. The doctors had explained that his system was still adapting to the unique antibodies, creating a biological connection between them that neither science nor corporate power could sever. "The garden, tell them I'll be there," he murmured, his fingers clutching at the silk sheets. "Father expects perfection." Sue leaned closer, glimpsing for the first time the weight of expectations that had shaped him. Even in his delirium, Xiang Heman remained bound by duty and performance. She dabbed a cool cloth against his temples, watching as his expression softened momentarily at her touch. "Yang Yu," he whispered, the name emerging with such tenderness that Sue felt like an intruder witnessing something intensely private. "I can't choose you over them. The merger would collapse." The name stirred a memory. Sue had seen it in company archives during her investigation. Gu Yingyu, daughter of a technology innovator whose partnership with Z Group had dissolved under mysterious circumstances nearly a decade ago. The business journals had mentioned only irreconcilable differences, but Si Huaijin's feverish confession revealed the personal cost behind the corporate language. As dawn broke, Si Huaijin's fever finally subsided. Sue had dozed off in the chair beside him, her hand still resting near his. She awakened to find him studying her with those calculating eyes, though something had shifted in his gaze. "You stayed," he stated simply, his voice hoarse. "You collapsed," she replied, matching his tone. "The doctors said your body is still producing antibodies specific to my biological markers." The separation triggered an autoimmune response. He sat up slowly, maintaining the careful distance that had characterized their reluctant alliance. "A weakness I can ill afford in my position." "Is that what you consider it? A weakness?" Sue asked, gathering her courage. "Or is it simply being human?" His expression hardened, the brief window into his vulnerability closing rapidly. "Humanity is a luxury in this world, Ms. Xingxing. One that costs more than you realize." "I think I'm beginning to understand the price," she countered, rising from the chair. "Your fever revealed quite a bit about what you've sacrificed, including someone named Yang Yu." The name hit him like a physical blow. For a millisecond, his perfectly composed expression faltered before the mask of corporate control descended once more. "My past relationships are not your concern. They become my concern when I'm legally your wife while you dream of another woman," Sue replied, surprising herself with the hint of jealousy in her voice. "Who was she to you?" Shi Huaiqian remained silent for so long that Sue thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a resignation she had never heard before. "Someone I was not permitted to choose," he said simply. "The board required a merger with a technology firm with defense contracts. Yang Yi's father refused, unless we married. My father refused as well, demanding I marry into a family with stronger political connections. The resulting conflict destroyed both the merger and," he trailed off, unwilling to complete the sentence. "And your relationship," Sue finished for him. "So you both lost everything because of family obligation." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of parallel experiences. Both had been pawns in games designed by others, their personal desires sacrificed for corporate strategy and family ambition. "We are not so different," she observed quietly. "Both of us were married off without our consent for business advantages. Both of us had our futures decided by others." For once, ZQIJin didn't contradict her. Instead, He rose from the bed with deliberate movements, straightening his disheveled appearance with the efficiency of someone accustomed to presenting perfection to the world. The difference, mid-Xing, is that I accepted my role. I understood what was required of me, and performed accordingly. His voice carried no resentment, only a matter-of-fact acknowledgement of the burden he had carried since childhood. At what cost? Sue asked. A life without genuine connection? Years of loneliness disguised as independence? Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Careful, you presume to know me based on fever dreams and corporate gossip. I know enough, Sue replied, standing her ground. I know you weren't always this cold. I know someone taught you that vulnerability equals weakness, and I know that beneath all your corporate power, you're just as trapped as I am. Their standoff was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass. Before Sue could react, Xue Jin moved with unexpected speed, pulling her behind him as security alarms blared throughout the residence. A projectile had shattered the bedroom window, narrowly missing where Sue had been standing moments before. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his arm extended protectively as he shielded her with his body. The threat passed quickly. Security determined it was a carefully aimed warning rather than a legitimate assassination attempt. But something fundamental had changed. Ji Huijin had reacted instinctively to protect her, revealing protective instincts that contradicted his carefully cultivated image of cold indifference. In the days that followed, Sue noticed subtle shifts in their interactions. Si Qian began including her in meetings, introducing her to key business associates not as an inconvenience, but as someone whose perspective held value. Where once he had kept her at arm's length, now he sought her input on matters related to the Chewy Group's operations, recognizing her unique insight into both corporate cultures. Their forced proximity became less uncomfortable as they discovered unexpected common ground. A shared appreciation for strategic thinking, a similar dry humor that emerged in rare, unguarded moments, and most surprisingly, a growing mutual respect. The transformation culminated at the annual Z Group Investors Gala. Sue stood at the periphery of the event, still uncertain of her place in this world of power and privilege, when Si Huijin approached her with unusual determination in his stride. "There's something I need to address," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "The board has been pressuring me about our arrangement." Sue felt her heart sink. "They want the annulment?" "They do," he confirmed. "They've presented several candidates they consider more strategically advantageous." Before disappointment could fully form, Shijin surprised her by taking her hand, their first public display of connection. "I've informed them that my decision is final," he continued, his eyes holding hers with unexpected intensity. "You are my wife, not by arrangement, but by my choice." Without warning, he led her to the center of the room and signaled for attention. The crowd fell silent as Shi Huijin, the man known for calculated business moves rather than emotional declarations, formally introduced Sue as his wife, not as a business arrangement, but as his chosen partner. The applause following Chi Huijin's declaration echoed through the ballroom, but beneath the sound of celebration lurked something darker. A carefully orchestrated plan set in motion years ago by someone who shared Sue's family name, but not her blood. The cameras captured their moment of triumph, broadcasting it across business channels nationwide, while somewhere in the shadows, the second daughter of the Sue family watched, with calculating eyes and a bitter smile. 3 days after the gala, Mei Lin Sue arrived at Z Group headquarters, unannounced. Her designer handbag clutched tightly against her pristine suit as she demanded an immediate audience with Si Huijin. Security personnel, recognizing her family name, escorted her to the executive floor, where Sue happened to be reviewing quarterly projections with the marketing team. "I'm sorry for interrupting," Mei Lin said, her voice carrying a practiced tremor as tears welled in her eyes. "But I can't stay silent any longer. My sister needs help, medical help, not this charade of a marriage. The conference room fell silent as Mei Lin placed a thick manila folder on the table, sliding it toward ZQA Jin with manicured fingers. These are Sue's medical records from the past 5 years. The episodes, the treatments, the delusions. It's all documented. She's been creating elaborate fantasies since we were children, but this is the most dangerous one yet. Xi Qianjin's expression remained impassive as he examined the contents, psychological evaluations, prescription histories, and therapist notes detailing Sue's supposed struggle with reality. Sue stared at the documents in disbelief. These fabrications appearing so official, with hospital letterheads and doctor signatures she didn't recognize. "I've never seen these doctors," Sue protested, her voice steady despite the shock. "These aren't my records." Mei Lin turned to her with practiced compassion. "This is exactly what the doctors warned us about. When confronted, you simply deny reality. Remember when you believed you were adopted at 12? Or when you claimed our parents were spies at 16? As the room watched this familial, confrontation unfold, Mei Lin moved to the true purpose of her visit. With theatrical reluctance, she explained the Su family's concern about the marriage being valid when one party wasn't mentally competent to consent. Then came her proposal. A solution meant to appear selfless, but revealing the truth. "Family honors its commitments," Mei Lin stated firmly. "The alliance between the Su family and Z Group must continue. If Su is deemed unfit, I am prepared to take her place in the marriage. I've been groomed for this position my entire life while Su was protected from responsibility due to her condition." The systematic dismantling of Su's credibility had begun. Over the next week, Mei Lin integrated herself into Z Group operations with remarkable efficiency. She attended meetings originally scheduled for Su, consulted on projects Su had initiated, and began accompanying Su Huaijin to business functions, always explaining Su's absence with concerned whispers about one of her episodes or needed rest. Xi Hijian maintained a careful distance from both women, observing more than engaging. When Su confronted him in his office, demanding to know if he believed these accusations, his response was measured. "Evidence is being presented from multiple sources. I'm evaluating all information before making any determination," he said, his clinical tone cutting deeper than outright rejection would have. Isolated and increasingly desperate, Su began her own investigation into Mei Lin's claims. Starting with the seemingly authentic medical records, she traced the documentation to a private clinic that had conveniently experienced a fire in their records department 3 months earlier. The digital backups showed inconsistencies. Creation dates. Su's methodical work uncovered more disturbing connections. Late one night, while examining financial records she'd managed to access through her still valid credentials, she discovered a series of payments from the Su family's accounts to a shell company that traced back to Zhang Yi, the same man who had previously attempted to frame her. Despite his official removal from Z Group, his influence persisted through a network of loyalists still embedded within the company. The pieces began to align with sickening clarity. The Su family had never intended for her to remain Xi Huaijin's wife. She had been merely a placeholder, securing the business alliance until they could substitute their favored daughter into the position. This explained why her supposed father had so readily signed her into a marriage without her knowledge or consent. She wasn't their flesh and blood. She was a temporary solution to be discarded when convenient. With the patriarch's revelations about her switched birth now confirmed by her own investigation, Su understood the full scope of the betrayal. The records she uncovered showed Mei Lin had been meeting with Zhang Yi for months, planning this replacement strategy with meticulous attention to detail. Their correspondence revealed promises of preferential positions within a restructured Z Group once Mei Lin secured her place as Xi Jin's wife, along with plans to eventually align Z Group more closely with competitors who had been courting the Sue family. Su compiled her evidence methodically, creating backup copies stored in multiple secure locations. She knew confronting her sister privately would only lead to more denials and manufactured evidence against her. This confrontation needed witnesses, particularly those whose judgment Mei Lin and her conspirators couldn't manipulate. The opportunity came during a quarterly board meeting where Mei Lin had positioned herself to give a presentation on future strategic partnerships. Su arrived unannounced. Her presence caused a ripple of whispers among the board members, who had been told she was receiving treatment at a private facility. "I apologize for interrupting," Su began, her voice calm despite the tension vibrating through the room. "But I believe the board should see these documents before making any decisions about Z Group's future partnerships." The evidence she presented was damning. Financial transactions linking Mei Lin and the Su family to Jiang Yi, communications detailing their plot to replace her once the business alliance was secured, and forensic analysis proving the medical records had been falsified. Most compelling was recorded footage from Jiang Yi's assistant, the same files that had appeared in competitors' possession weeks later. "The Su family orchestrated this conspiracy, not just to replace me in this marriage, but to gain control of Z Group through my sister's position," Su explained, her composure never wavering, even as Mei Lin's face contorted with rage. Their ultimate goal was to weaken Z Group from within, making it vulnerable to acquisition by interests they've already aligned with. Mei Lin's carefully constructed facade crumbled under the weight of irrefutable evidence. Her denial quickly transformed into defiance, as she realized her position was indefensible. "You were never supposed to be the one," she finally exclaimed, abandoning pretense. "Do you think the Su family would waste their prize alliance on someone who isn't even truly a Su? You were a convenient tool, a temporary solution, until arrangements could be finalized for me to take my rightful place. You should have taken the money when it was offered, and disappeared." The boardroom fell silent at this inadvertent confirmation of everything Su had presented. Zhe Huijin, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke, his voice carrying the cold precision of a judge delivering a verdict. "Security will escort Ms. Mei Lin from the premises. All Su family representatives are hereby suspended from access to Z Group facilities and information pending a full investigation. This meeting is adjourned." The dust had barely settled on Mei Lin's failed coup when a single phone call from an unfamiliar number changed everything. "Mei Su," the elderly voice trembled through the receiver. "I've protected your father's documents for 27 years, but I can't take them to my grave. The Chewy Group was never meant to operate without its rightful heir, and that heir is you." Sue's hands shook as she ended the call. For a woman who had spent her life believing she was nobody special, the weight of this revelation felt like stepping into someone else's life. The following morning, she found herself standing before the imposing steel and glass headquarters of the Chewy Group, the reflection of clouds sliding across its mirrored surface, as if affirming the shifting nature of her reality. The executive floor buzzed with whispers as she was escorted through. These men and women had built careers assuming they would never answer to a true heir. Their eyes followed her, some curious, others openly hostile. The boardroom fell silent as she entered, 12 pairs of eyes studying her with calculated skepticism. "Gentlemen, ladies," Sue began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I understand my presence here is unexpected." "Unexpected is an understatement, Miss Sue," interrupted a silver-haired man at the far end of the table. "We've operated independently for nearly 3 decades. Now you appear out of nowhere claiming to be Chewy's daughter? Forgive us if we require more than an old man's phone call as proof." Sue nodded, having anticipated this resistance. She opened the leather portfolio she'd brought and removed a sealed envelope. Inside, you'll find comprehensive DNA analysis performed by 3 independent laboratories, confirming my genetic relationship to Jianguo Chewy. Additionally, there are birth records, amended birth certificates, and hospital records from the night of the switch. The executives passed the documents among themselves, their expressions shifting from dismissal to disbelief as they examined the evidence. The DNA results were unequivocal. Sue shared 99, 99, 97% of specific genetic markers with the "There's more," Sue continued, retrieving a small flash drive from her bag. "This contains my father's personal journal, detailing his suspicions about who orchestrated the attempt on his life and why my identity needed to be concealed." The room's atmosphere changed as the journal entries appeared on the projection screen. Ochio's own handwriting described the rivalry that had developed between himself and Chi-jian's. "Your father believed my husband's father sabotaged a joint venture that would have revolutionized the industry," Sue explained, watching their reactions. But what neither of them knew was that a third party had manipulated them both, creating evidence of betrayal where none existed. The oldest board member removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I remember those days. The partnership's collapse nearly destroyed both companies. Tensions were so high that security details were doubled for all executives. And now you're married to the son of your father's greatest enemy," observed a younger woman, her tone making clear how convenient she found this coincidence. Sue met her gaze directly. "A marriage arranged without my knowledge, but one that may represent the reconciliation my father would have wanted once he discovered the truth." Over the following weeks, Sue immersed herself in learning every aspect of the Chewy Group's operations. Where the executives expected to find a naive figurehead, they discovered a woman with remarkable business acumen who asked precise, insightful questions. She spent days in the research and development department, nights studying financial reports, and weekends visiting manufacturing facilities. The first test of her leadership came when a critical supplier threatened to terminate their contract in favor of a competitor's offer. Rather than capitulating to their demands, as the board recommended, Sue analyzed their production costs and presented a counter-proposal that included efficiency improvements the supplier hadn't considered. They not only remained with Chewy Group, but agreed to an expanded partnership. "She thinks like her father," the operations director commented after the meeting. "Same strategic mind, same unwillingness to be bullied." Across town, at Z Group headquarters, Ji Huaijian watched his wife's transformation with growing fascination. The woman he had once dismissed as an unfortunate complication was emerging as a formidable business leader in her own right. During their evening discussions, he found himself increasingly valuing her perspective on issues. "The Henderson contract isn't worth pursuing," she told him one night, as they reviewed documents in his study. "Their financials show 3/4 of declining revenue. They're shopping for a lifeline, not a partnership." Chi-Chan canceled the negotiations the next day. When Henderson filed for bankruptcy protection 2 weeks later, the board members who had questioned his decision fell silent. As word spread of Sue's legitimacy and competence, and of the strengthening alliance between her and Shi Huaijin, competitors began to panic. The potential merger of Chewy Group and Z Group would create an entity controlling nearly 40% of the market. Emergency board meetings were called across the industry as executives scrambled to position themselves against this emerging threat. Anonymous tips to regulators alleging antitrust concerns appeared. Suppliers reported pressure to choose sides. Talent recruiters were dispatched to poach key personnel from both organizations, with promises of substantial signing bonuses. "They're terrified," Shi Qianqian remarked, as they reviewed the latest intelligence reports. "As they should be." Sue looked up from her tablet. "Fear makes people dangerous. We need to move carefully." The pressure culminated in a coordinated attack. Simultaneous negative press releases, a sudden drop in both companies' stock prices, and rumors of impending regulatory investigations. Sue recognized the pattern from her father's journal, the same tactics used to drive a wedge between the original partners decades ago. Rather than retreating, Sue requested a joint session of both boards. The tension in the room was palpable, as members from companies that had been rivals for a generation sat across from each other, suspicious and uncomfortable. For too long, We've operated as enemies because of a misunderstanding engineered by those who feared our combined strength, Sue began, standing confidently at the head of the table. I propose we honor our separate histories while creating something stronger than either company could be alone. She unveiled a vision that preserved the distinct identities and strengths of both corporations while integrating their operations where synergies existed. Research teams would collaborate rather than duplicate efforts. Manufacturing facilities would specialize rather than compete. Distribution networks would complement rather than overlap. This isn't a merger where one company disappears into another, she explained. This is an alliance that respects our separate legacies while acknowledging that we are stronger together than apart. The initial skepticism gradually gave way to cautious interest as financial projections demonstrated the potential benefits. By the meeting's end, both boards had authorized exploratory committees to develop implementation plans. 3 months later, Sue stood at the podium of the Chewy Group's annual shareholder meeting, Giudice at her side. The announcement of their strategic alliance sent ripples through the business world, and the stock price of both companies soared. Photographs of the founder's daughter and her husband adorned business publications worldwide, accompanied by speculation about the new corporate landscape their partnership would create. Their triumph at the shareholder meeting marked not the end, but the beginning of their greatest challenge. While stock prices soared, Si Huijin's health mysteriously deteriorated, revealing a terrible truth. Their enemies had found the perfect leverage to destroy everything they had built together. Within 48 hours of their historic announcement, an orchestrated crisis hit both the Chewy Group and Z Group. Manufacturing plants mysteriously lost power, causing millions in damages. Critical financial documents leaked to regulatory authorities, prompting immediate investigations. Digital infrastructure suffered sophisticated cyber attacks that breached previously impenetrable firewalls. The calculated precision of these coordinated strikes left no doubt this was warfare designed to fracture the newly formed alliance. Sue watched from the emergency command center as reports flooded in from facilities across 3 continents. The systematic nature of the attacks spoke of resources and influence far beyond the capabilities of mere corporate rivals. She turned to Chi Huijin, whose face had grown alarmingly pale. This wasn't improvised. Someone's been planning this for months, waiting for the perfect moment. Si Huijin nodded, his breathing labored. They're targeting our most vulnerable integration points. He stumbled suddenly, catching himself against the conference table as sweat beaded on his forehead. When Sue reached for him, his skin burned beneath her touch. The medical team arrived within minutes, but their expressions confirmed Sue's worst fears. Si Huijin's condition had advanced beyond their expectations. The biological dependency that had formed between them had evolved into something more complex and dangerous. What had begun as a simple protein exchange had transformed into a complete immunological adaptation in Shi Huijin's system. His body has created antibodies specific to your biological markers, the specialist explained later in the privacy of their residence. The recent stress has accelerated the process. Without a more permanent solution, his organs will begin to fail within weeks. The ultimatum arrived the following morning, via the Minister of Economic Affairs himself, a thin envelope hand-delivered with governmental seals. Sue read it aloud to Chi Yijian, who sat propped up in bed, his once commanding presence diminished by illness. The merger poses unacceptable national security and economic stability risks, she read, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. The union must be dissolved within 72 hours. Or both companies will face immediate regulatory action, asset freezes, and potential nationalization of critical infrastructure. Si Huijin's family elders arrived that afternoon, their concern for his health quickly overtaken by urgent discussions about preservation of the family legacy. They spoke as if Sue weren't in the room, debating which assets could be salvaged if they complied with the demand. "You understand what must be done?" the eldest uncle said finally, addressing Sue directly for the first time. Your alliance was ambitious, but ultimately untenable. Separate the companies now while you still can, or lose everything your real father built. Sue met his gaze without flinching. And what about your nephew's life? The doctors say separation could kill him. Medical complications can be managed, the uncle replied dismissively. The family's legacy cannot. Later that night, as security teams worked around the clock to contain the damage from the continued attacks, Sue found Yang Jian standing at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the city lights. Despite his weakened state, he carried himself with the same quiet dignity that had first caught her attention. They want us to choose, he said without turning. Our companies or each other. Sue moved beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his fever. Do you remember when you first learned I was your wife on paper? You couldn't wait to be rid of me. A smile touched his lips. And now, I can't imagine a world where you aren't beside me. He turned to her, his eyes finding hers in the half-light. When did that happen? Su Xingxing. Somewhere between saving your life and you saving mine, I suppose. The following morning brought the specialists with their proposed solution, a radical procedure that would synthesize Sue's unique biological markers and permanently integrate them into CYGN's immune system. The risks were significant. The procedure would require extracting bone marrow and other cellular material from Sue in quantities that could leave her immunocompromised for months, perhaps years. And if we don't do it? Si Qianqianqiu asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The chief specialist cleared her throat. Your condition will continue to deteriorate. Eventually, even Sue's presence won't be enough. When they were alone again, Sue made her decision. We're doing the procedure. Shiqian took her hand. You know what they're saying. If you're weakened by this, our enemies will move against the Chui group immediately. You could lose everything your father built. I've lost everything before, Sue replied. When I was switched as a baby, when I learned my entire identity was a lie, when I discovered the family I grew up with had used me as a bargaining chip. Companies can be rebuilt. You cannot be replaced. The procedure was scheduled for dawn. That night, as Si Chihuayan slept fitfully, Sue received an encrypted message from his grandfather. The old patriarch had uncovered evidence that the attacks and ultimatum were coordinated by a coalition of government officials with significant investments in competing conglomerates. They had been monitoring Si Chihuayan's condition for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They know about tomorrow, the message concluded. Expect them to move against both companies while you are vulnerable. Sue spent the night making preparations, calling in favors from allies she had cultivated over recent months. By morning, she had constructed a protective framework around their most critical assets, not enough to prevent all damage, but sufficient to ensure survival. The medical facility occupied the entire top floor of Z Group headquarters. As Sue was prepped for the procedure, reports came in of emergency board meetings being called at both companies, proxy votes being collected, and regulatory officials arriving at regional offices. Their enemies were moving exactly as predicted. Are you sure about this? Si Qiajin asked, as they lay on adjacent tables, medical equipment humming around them. Sue turned her head to meet his gaze. I've never been more certain of anything. The procedure lasted 9 hours. As Sue's biological material was extracted, processed, and introduced into Ji Huaijin's system, their corporate enemies moved aggressively. Hostile takeover attempts were launched simultaneously against vulnerable subsidiaries. Regulators froze certain operational accounts based on anonymous tips of irregularities. Media outlets published coordinated stories questioning the company's stability. But what their enemies couldn't have known was that Sue had prepared for exactly this scenario. Trusted allies activated contingency plans she had established. Key evidence of the conspiracy was released to specific journalists and government watchdogs. The protective legal structures she had quietly put in place held firm against the most aggressive attacks. When Sue finally regained consciousness, the room was dim and quiet. Her body felt hollow, drained of strength, but a warm pressure on her hand anchored her to the world. She turned her head with effort to find Ji Kwai Jin sitting beside her bed, his eyes clear for the first time in weeks, his skin no longer burning with fever. "It worked," he said simply. Sue tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Chi Qianqiang brought water to her lips. Our company's wounded but standing. Your preparations saved them both." He squeezed her hand. "My grandfather sends his congratulations. He says we've inherited his talent for turning traps into opportunities." As the morning light streamed through the windows of their shared suite, Su Qingxing watched Shi Huaijin, sleeping peacefully beside her. Their journey had transformed them both in ways neither could have imagined that fateful night. Throughout the twisted path of corporate schemes and family machinations, Sue had discovered that true strength wasn't found in boardroom dominance or financial portfolios. It resided in unwavering integrity when facing manipulation and betrayal. Her consistent refusal to compromise her values, even when threatened by those with seemingly unlimited resources, had been her most powerful weapon. The beauty of their unexpected connection proved that genuine power grows from authenticity, not status.